I'm going to talk about Brook Street. Obviously, there's a stream there, but I'm going to talk about the Watershed. It's one of the oldest streets in the village. Obviously, Albany Post Road is probably the oldest, but it's an important historical street and has some unique issues dealing with the water. So what I'll do is I'll want to take everybody kind of through a tour of the Watershed from the upper part of it down to the Hudson River, and just to see various aspects of it. And some of the issues that we need to deal with as a village in terms of dealing with stormwater. So I'm going to go up to the laptop and we'll go through the presentation. And after that, I'm open for any questions. If anyone has any questions during the presentation about something, I can answer questions then too. The first couple images are of Brook Street. It's behind the municipal building. This is, and I'll refer to upper, middle, and lower Brook Street as I go through the presentation. So this is Upper Brook Street. There's some houses on the right-hand side. The stream actually runs behind those houses. The wall is the municipal building wall, and then further down the block there's some commercial buildings. So the middle section of Brook Street is kind of a natural area. There's an open stream channel, which is the historic stream channel that wasn't filled in at some time in the past. And on the right-hand side is a steep hillside, so there's very little development in this area. And I believe some of the stream channel on the left, the stream channel parcels are either owned by the village or an open space agency, so they're not going to be developed. And Lower Brook Street, looking out towards the Hudson River, the pedestrian bridge and the Yacht Club, and the buildings are very dense here. There's a mix of commercial buildings and residential multifamily buildings. So it's actually a real unique area of the village with respect to zoning. There's commercial and residential, two-family, some three-family houses just mixed all together in a very dense area. The building on the right-hand side is Conte Electric, and their vans are there, and I'll refer to that area. Right up above, right before Conte Electric, the stream goes underground. There's a culvert, and that culvert takes it out to the Hudson River near the Yacht Club. So anytime we're dealing with water, it's fine when it's flowing gently, but of course during a storm there's issues. We find out that the drainage system doesn't have the right capacity, things get plugged up, and we get storm damage. Some recent storms in the village, 1999 Hurricane Floyd, a lot of water. That was a 100-year storm with 7.2 inches. And in June 2001, Father's Day storm, about 5 inches, and that was a 10-year storm. I think in 2001 is when the village hired a Verken Bartolucci environmental consulting firm to look at the watersheds in the village, to analyze the watersheds, and to model the watersheds from a computer model standpoint, to look at all the stormwater infrastructure, to find out if it has the right capacity. And some of it is under capacity, and other stormwater infrastructure has other issues. So that was the start of kind of the detailed analysis. What the village board did is they picked out 3 priority watersheds, because I'll show on X map there's a lot of watersheds in the village. Those were the watersheds where the most damage occurred. There was High Street, Brook Street, Grand Street. Those were the initial 3 watersheds that were studied in detail. And then later on, probably a few years later, the village added Baton Road watershed because there were problems there.
Dan, can you explain the term watershed? Because I'm thinking about the reservoir.
Watershed, if you're on in a stream or any water course, it's the land area where precipitation would fall and it would reach that point. So if you're on a small stream, it would have a small watershed. Brook Street has a watershed, a land area, catchment area for precipitation that would eventually flow into the stream and discharge at a certain point. So the village's engineering consultant produced this map. It's just a simple schematic of the various watersheds in the village. And I don't know how many numbers, maybe 18 or 19, 20 watersheds. And you can see most of the watersheds do run out to the Hudson River. There's some that go to the Croton River. And Brook Street is number 10. This area right here is the Yacht Club, and that's where the stream comes out. And the watershed actually goes into the town of Cortland, up in this area. Some of these watersheds, this one is High Street, this one is Grand Street that was studied. So the watersheds that are in the populated areas were studied. And if I can see correctly, I think this is the Baton Road watershed that also was studied.
I'm trying to understand what we're looking at. Are the red lines the boundaries of the watershed, not the water itself?
They're the boundaries of the watershed. So the stream would,
The high points.
that's the ridge line.
The one stream and okay.
Yes. And this is just a close-up view of the Brook Street watershed. So the Yacht Club, Brook Street is right here, the municipal building. Lounsbury Road is in the watershed. Fox Road. If you go through the golf course, you get to the Arboretum. That's in the watershed. Large majority of the golf course is in the watershed. The Con Ed power line, right over the village line, is in the watershed. And then there's a small area of the town. This is Upland Lane and some ponds in the town of Cortland that contribute to the watershed. Yes?
So looking at this, the water, if it rained, for example, the water would tend to fall either right of a line or left of a line. That's the high point.
The red line would be the high point, and the brook would be the low point. So the water is flowing from the red line down to the brook in all directions based on the topography. But eventually all the water in this area will flow into the stream and work its way out to the Hudson River at the Yacht Club.
So the most likely flooding areas would be like in the center of each of the watersheds towards the lowest part of the map?
Yes, the most flow is going to be down at the bottom, and I have some numbers, and that's where most of the flooding problems would be, at the bottom.
Where's our dummy light, man?
Dummy light. This is Mount Airy going up, so if we go back into the village,
Okay.
it's probably right about here.
All right.
And that dummy light's in the Grand Street watershed. So just some few data for the Brook Street watershed. It's 442 acres with 342 acres in the village. The remaining acreage is in the town of Cortland. It's 12,000 feet long, a little over 2 miles. It has an elevation drop of about 600 feet. The receiving water is the Hudson River, not the Croton River. And then some peak storms, storm flows for various year storms. And we talked about the Hurricane Floyd, the 100-year storm, and the Father's Day storm, a 10-year storm. And those cubic feet per second numbers are at the bottom of the watershed, how much water would be flowing as a peak flow into the Hudson River. And I did some research recently. Someone asked me a question, and I forget what it was for. Does Brook Street have a name? Does a stream on Brook Street or in that watershed have a name? And I couldn't find one. There's nothing on the USGS maps, and they usually do fairly good research and put the name of a stream, watercourse on the map if they can find it. DEC, that doesn't have any record of a name for the stream. And actually, DEC just calls it an unnamed tributary to the Hudson River. So it's the brook, unnamed tributary. This, I don't expect you to really see anything on, other than this is what DeVerco Bartolucci prepared. This line right here is the watershed line. And this map is basically kind of a summary of the computer model. They went out and measured culverts, the sizes, the slopes, cross-sections of stream channels, areas of ponds, and put it into a computer model. And this is just a kind of a graphic representation of different pond numbers, different reach numbers, stream numbers, different culvert numbers, to be able to, if you're looking at the data, to be able to visualize where it is. So what I'd like to do is kind of walk through the watershed. These are just aerial images. We have them from the county, but they're the same ones on Google. In the upper part of the watershed, here's the ponds in the town of Cortland. That's the village line. You can see the Con Ed easement running through here. Some streams come down into the Arboretum, a little darker area, that's the wetland. The golf course portion right here, that's the golf course irrigation pond that has a spillway that discharges into the Arboretum. And the golf course, when they built the golf course, part of the environmental impact statement required, or the environmental impact studies required that the golf course, they want water on the golf course to be able to irrigate the fairways and the greens. And there's a requirement to actually discharge water into the Arboretum to have a kind of the amount of water that was flowing in there prior to development of the golf course. And what was, that was analyzed and determined to be 32 gallons a minute, so the golf course is required to discharge 32 gallons a minute into the Arboretum as a kind of a base flow to keep it wet and healthy.
They've been living up to that lately. There was some talk about that they weren't for a while.
It's been on and off, and right now the village is discussing that with them, and hopefully, right now it's a manual system, and hopefully it's going to be turned into more of a kind of a sensor automated control system, so we won't have to rely on someone actually going out there and turning the valve on. From the Arboretum, there's a stream that flows down through the golf course into Bessemer Swamp, and then into Kaplan's Pond, and then Kaplan's Pond has a stream that flows down from Kaplan's Pond, and you can see the stream channel, that dark line, flows down to Old Post Road North, and that is a undeveloped stream channel, wooded. There's one house at the top on the intersection of Giglio Court and Lounsbury where the stream channel actually runs under the house. The house was built over it, which is a nice feature.
What street is that?
The Lounsbury and Giglio Court, if you go up there, there's a fence on Lounsbury, so it's difficult to see the house from Lounsbury, but you really have to either get a glimpse before the fence starts or try to get a glimpse from Giglio Court, but it's a pretty neat house. And at the Old Post Road, the stream starts to flow into a culvert system. As a kind of a side note, these parcels in here, this is an open space parcel that the village has, and these parcels in here are owned by Croton Community Nursery School, and there's been some discussion at the planning board and the village board where this would be turned into open space as part of their 3-lot subdivision, which will keep this stream channel in a natural state. The lower part of the watershed, the stream, it's a channel right there, that dark line. It goes into a culvert system, goes under Old Post Road. Here's the municipal building, Yacht Club's down here. There's Brook Street. Terrace Place is right here. The stream goes underground, flows through the Old Post Road north through a culvert, and goes through some open channels, and then goes underground under structures. This area is an open stream channel, and at the bottom you can see the very narrow lots here, which to me must mean that the land was very valuable. Whoever had the land and divided it up into very narrow lots. The buildings are very close together, if not touching in many cases. And that stream goes under these buildings through the backyards, under the highway, under Metro North, under Elliott Way, and ends up in the Yacht Club Marina. So in the lower section of Brook Street, there's these orange symbols represent the stormwater system. So there's a piping system under Old Post Road. There's piping coming down Lower North Highland Place that ties in. This isn't completed. There's a piping system. Those are catch basins that comes down Old Post Road North and ties into the stream. There's an open channel, and then more culverts under buildings, an open channel system along the midsection of Brook Street, which is the natural channel, and then some culverts that convey the water to the yacht club, and we'll take a look at those. In the upper part of the watershed, this is just a zoomed-in map. Culvert on Old Post Road. There's an open channel there. There's a garage. Culvert. This culvert's actually not straight. It misses this house and misses this building and runs along the sidewalk, so I have to revise that. This is the culvert under Brook Street, and then piping system all the way down. What's kind of unique about this is that Many times you think of streams and stormwater systems and that the culverts would be owned by the government, the village, town, city, the state, the county, especially when they involve multiple properties. And in this case, it's the village would own this and be responsible for this. It's in the village right away. It's Old Post Road North. There's a culvert that ties in that's on private property, so the private property owner would be responsible for that. All this on private property, there's a culvert in the street right away on Brook Street, so the village is responsible for that. And the culvert, it's almost like a common driveway. Multiple property owners are using the same culvert, and you can imagine if there's a maintenance issue with the culvert down here, and you're relying on that culvert and someone else's culvert, and the property owner doesn't maintain it, that's a problem. And it's a legal problem that's the lawyers would have to work out. Yes?
And what is the significance of the squares and the triangles?
They're,
Catch basins or?
it's just different symbolism from the GIS system to represent structures. The lines are pipes. There's some data associated with those lines. The round ones are manholes. The square ones are catch basins. The triangles are discharge points, or they have a dot inlet points. So just different symbols to represent various stormwater infrastructure, and we have the same, obviously different infrastructure, but same thing for water, wastewater, and other infrastructure systems in the village.
What's the size of those piping systems there?
We'll get to that. They're all different sizes. Further down, this is Adam West. The culvert discharges back into an open channel at that point. This is just a simple catch basin system and a pipe getting water off the street and putting it into the channel. And then above Conte's parking lot, there's a head wall with a pipe culvert going under the buildings. And there's also an on-street system just to keep the street from flooding that brings water down to the very end of Brook Street. So this is a little bit further down, the head wall, the pipe under Conte's and some other buildings, the culvert, through the backyards, through private property, and eventually it becomes a state DOT culvert, head wall, Metro North culvert, head wall, and then village culvert under Elliott Way. And the on-street system just ties into that culvert system. The culvert up at, take a look at Conte's, is under some old buildings, and this section is quite old. It's a stone culvert, brick, concrete, various different materials. This culvert right here was put in, I want to say about roughly 20 years ago by the village. Village received some community development block grant funds from the county, and this area was an area that was designated to be able to spend that grant money, and the village had a new culvert design. I've heard there was just a bunch of old culverts there that were rusty and creating some drainage problems. There's an old stone culvert from this manhole out to the state system that's in pretty good condition. And then obviously the state system has a modern precast concrete culvert, and it's sized properly. Metro North has a pretty good culvert, and there's a pretty decent culvert under Elliott Way.
How big are these culverts when they get to that point?
We'll take a look at that. I have pictures. It's just easier to kind of talk about them when the pictures come up. So what I'm going to go through is just kind of a little interesting history of Brook Street development, and I just had various maps, and I'll take a look at the maps and to see how development occurred. And you can see over time, Brook Street was probably a lot of commerce on Brook Street. There was a upper dock, a lot of commerce going up and down. Some of the old maps you won't be able to read show different commercial areas on the bottom of Brook Street. So people actually built over the stream, put box culverts in other culverts and built their buildings right over the stream, which is typically not a good thing to do, but it was done. So this map is from 1797. Obviously there's not much on it because there's not much around back then. This is Albany Post Road, right here. This is the Yacht Club area. That's the dock or landing, and this is probably near Senasca Park. So this was Grand Street area. This was Brook Street area. And you can see there's a dotted line, a path some type, a road, traveled way from these dock areas to Albany Post Road to be able to get to the river. And this line, the map maker did put the stream on it that discharged at that point.
Are those the mills on the Croton River there, Dan? Yeah.
That's what it, yes, mills. This map, 1853 map lands of Phillip Van Wyck. This was basically a subdivision that occurred back in 1853. No planning board approval needed back then. And the stream, this is Brook Street. It's actually labeled, it's kind of hard to see, but I read it, Upper Landing Road. This is Lower Landing Road, now Grand Street. There's the dock. And the stream, if I can figure out right, this line right here in between Brook Street and Terrace, crosses Brook Street, and it crosses Old Post Road north there, and the stream goes up the hill and goes down the side of Brook Street or Upper Landing Road out, and the railroad culvert wasn't installed back then. The stream makes its way out to the Hudson. And on this map, trying to get an answer for the title, why do they call it Brook Street? Phillip Van Wyck hired a surveyor, carved up this land into streets and lots, and you can see Van Wyck Street. Obviously, you always name a street after yourself. And there's Brook Street, which is this street right here. So on this early map from 1853, Brook Street this was probably already named Upper Landing Road, but that name was picked for that street. It's kind of hard to put in. It was never put in, probably for a good reason. It's just a very steep hill going down, and probably not practical at that time or even now to put that type of street in that direction. So at some point after that, this was changed. This was swapped. The lots were probably reconfigured. This street parcel or right-of-way was probably merged into some of the adjacent lots, and that name Brook Street was transferred over to this road. This is a section of Beers Atlas from 1868, and Brook Street is right here, the dock, and I colored it light blue, but the stream flows down, and you can see a lot of little black squares at the bottom of Brook Street. So there's a lot of buildings at the very bottom, less further up. The next few maps are the Sanborn maps. Sanborn Map Company made very good maps, a lot of detailed information on them, and I'll go through a couple of them for various years. Intersection of Brook and this is actually where South Riverside Avenue changes to North Riverside Avenue, and this is South Riverside Avenue. So I'll just say Riverside Avenue because it's right at the change. And all these maps, South Riverside Avenue was moved when there's no highway here, so when Route 9 came in, South Riverside Avenue was moved in the Brook Street location to this location. So a lot of the buildings along South Riverside Avenue are taken down as part of that highway construction, and also some of the very lower buildings on Brook Street were demolished when the state highway was put in South and North Riverside Avenue were shifted over to the east. These maps do show the stream coming down. At this location, the stream goes underground, returns to the surface, and then underground again to the Hudson. So section being placed on the ground, and maybe this property owner wanted to build a building back here, and to be able to get to that building needed to put some type of culvert in. In 1903, that area is in a culvert still, but you can see this building was built over the stream. People needed more space. Whatever was in that building could have been a commercial establishment and needed more space. The only place to go, the lot width is narrow, is back into the hill, which meant going over the stream and piping the stream under the property. 1911, again, the stream goes under this building. There's a section right here that indicates a culvert. And the maps don't flow. Sanborn Map Company, you would think they would have kind of use the same symbols, but some of the later maps, whoever made the maps dropped some of the symbols off the map. So it's kind of interesting that they didn't have a kind of a standard going for the maps, or it was changed. Underground, and then the map maker shows the culvert here as dotted lines.
Dan, I noticed it's called Brook Street there. Go back and see, when did it change its name from Upper Landing to Brook Street? There's Brook, and there's Upper Landing. So between 1897 and 1903.
About the turn of the century.
We still don't know why.
Maybe it was done for just a century.
There's lots of Brooks.
This is 1911, and the Sanborn Map Company mapped the upper section of Brook Street. The stream goes under Old Post Road North, close to a building. Looks like it goes through that quarter of the building, so it must have been some type of culvert there, and then goes under Brook Street, and then there's a building that's built right over the stream. This may be the antique shop or the old perfume factory. This was interesting to me. There's actually a street coming down here, which is a large hill, so I don't know why someone would map that out as a street, and that obviously never was built.
Notice that the Old Post Road is called Highland.
Yep, that was Highland Avenue at that time. 1924, at the bottom, the stream isn't shown here as an open channel, but you can see these buildings. So there must have been a culvert here, and then some of this could have been open channels. And on a later map, it does show it. On a 1937 topographic map, the map maker does show it as open channels. So I would imagine back in 24, that was an open channel in that location. The upper part of Brook Street in 1924, we had looked at this building, and this was expanded. It's a larger building in 1924. There's another building right at the culvert crossing that was built, and some other buildings right here with the stream actually running in front of the building. That would probably make it difficult to get in and out of the building. We actually have this map in the office from 1934, so I just took a photo of it. I didn't have scans of this. So I drew this 1934 map. Is interesting because it just lost the stream channel. It's not on the Sanborn map. So the stream channel comes down here in the open channel, Conte's building, and you can see this building is now extended back. The stream goes under these buildings, this building, and this building's extended back, and these buildings are enclosed in. So there's more and more building and probably more and more undergrounding of the stream into culverts. 1934, same year, but the upper part of the watershed. And unfortunately, there's a stream here that's shown by the map maker, but then no other stream is shown on the map. But additional buildings are built along Brook Street. The perfume, that may be Adam West, that may be the perfume. Masonic Hall is there. It's an apartment building now, and some of the commercial buildings. So more and more construction, more and more undergrounding of the stream. So the next couple of images are photos of various points in the watershed, going from the upper part of the watershed down to the Hudson River. Up at the golf course, this is the current water supply of 32 gallons a minute into the stream that feeds the golf course. There's basically a hose hooked up to the water main, and water is discharged into the stone-lined channel, and it flows into the arboretum. And there's a weir before the arboretum, and if it's at the top of the weir, that's 32 gallons a minute. So that water is being discharged into the upper part of the watershed. Kaplan's Pond, further down along Lounsbury Road. We had done a depth survey in the pond, and this, The 1937 topographic map shows this as a natural area. It wasn't dammed up in 1937, so sometime after that, maybe in the 40s, this earthen dam was constructed, and this wetland area was turned into a pond. And the depths are, in the shallow area, maybe 3-4 feet, 7-8 feet throughout the pond, and near the dam, there's maybe 10-11 feet at that section. It's a 2-acre pond. In 2005, we did some work at the outlet structure. The village received some county funding, some CDBG funding for the Brook Street area, and it was down at Brook Street. It wasn't a lot of money. I think it was maybe, I'll say, $75,000 or $80,000 from the county, and it wasn't enough money really to do any drainage work on Brook Street. So we asked the county to actually transfer the use of that money in terms of a public works project to outside the area that we were supposed to use it in, but provided it had a benefit to the lower section of Brook Street, which this does. And we decided to upgrade the outlet of Kaplan's Pond to be able to turn it into a detention pond, basically a new outlet, new drain before it rains, like tonight. We would open the valve like we did earlier today and drain the pond down, and that would catch the water coming off the Arboretum, Bessemer Swamp, and detain it and reduce the peak in the lower section of Brook Street. And this was, in 2005, the condition of the spillway and the outlet. So that was taken out, new rebar footings were put in. You can see sleeves right here and here for the pipe. This will extend into the pond with a screen on it. The valve would go right here, and this would discharge into the spillway area. So the spillway was completed with a low weir. This has some flashboards that can be put in. I want to say that's about 1 foot, so we can just maintain the water level in the pond plus or minus 1 foot just by removing flashboards. And this is the high flow weir. There's also an emergency overflow spillway. This is during probably a storm event, and you can see the water discharging out the side. The pond is filling up. It's flowing over the smaller weir, and if it starts to flow over the larger weir, we would close the valve. And it took us a while to get, this is a manually operated system. A couple of times we weren't paying attention to how quickly we closed it, and the rain stopped and the pond didn't fill up, which got the neighbors annoyed. So now we close the valve a little earlier to fill up the pond. And this turtle, I felt bad because we built it and we didn't, in a dam you provide a fish ladder. We didn't provide a turtle ladder, so we did pick the turtle up and throw it in the pond, but something maybe we'll build a little rock step for turtles if they're moving up the stream and need to get into the pond. So this is the pond drain. There's a lot of vegetation in Kaplan's Pond. And it does plug the screen, and DPW has to clear out the screen. But this is down to the drain pipe in the pond. This picture is a typical picture of the area between Kaplan's Pond and Old Post Road North, a wooded stream channel, and it's pretty much an all-natural area. Old Post Road North. This is on the west side of Old Post Road. This is the culvert that discharges under the road. It's down quite a bit, and we have some concern about this basically stone retaining wall in this section. This is a view inside the culvert looking out. Part of the culvert is a brick arch. You can see it here. And at the outfall, there's some stone and basically a box culvert that discharges out the end. This could have been extended or could have been constructed this way originally. And there is some undermining of the stonework. If there's a high stream flow, there is some scouring of the stones, and we have to hire someone to go in here and remortar this up on both sides. This channel has a lot of capacity, as you can see. This is Pat Sanfordino. He owns the house down below the channel, this culvert, so he's very concerned about water and how the culverts function.
How old is that culvert
Well, this is on Albany Post Road, so I didn't go back and look at the maps, but you know, it's probably very old. You know, one of the, back into, I don't know, the 1700s possibly, 1800s. There's bricks here, so I think that would kind of place it in a time frame when bricks were available. There could have been, you know, any culvert like that may have been rebuilt. You know, it's an Albany Post Road, so there's probably something there originally, maybe stones, and then it you know, collapsed, and it eventually was redone with brick, and it's a really good job, and it's lasted all these years. So this is looking upstream. There's a stone foundation, a brick arch. This is the inlet to the culvert, and there's a concrete pipe that takes the stream into the culvert. Yes?
The OPRN and the RCP stand for what?
Old Post Road North, and a reinforced concrete pipe.
And what's the RCP?
Reinforced concrete pipe. And that's just a picture of the concrete pipe bringing the water into the culvert. I think it's a 48-inch concrete pipe. One recommendation from DeVerco Bartolucci was to put a trash rack, basically a screen. I'll also show you a picture of a trash rack on the inlet to that pipe, which is a good recommendation to keep debris, logs and branches from clogging it up. The problem is that it's a private pipe, and for the village to put a trash rack there, we'd be working on private property, so there's easements and property rights, and the owner of the property could put a trash rack, but it's probably an expensive proposition.
What's the capacity of a 48-inch pipe
Um,
in terms of gallons per second?
it may be, it depends on the slope, but I would say we put a 30-inch in over on High Street, and the capacity was about 80 cubic feet per second. So this may be around 150, 160, 170 cubic feet per second.
So that couldn't carry the 100-year storm, which was 350 cubic feet per second.
Right.
And that's all of the brook goes through that pipe.
The entire brook goes through that pipe. Yeah.
So a 100-year storm is going to have a problem.
Yes. It'll build up head. Water, if it can't get into the pipe, will build up head and actually pressurize the pipe and increase the flow through the pipe. I don't have the computer model and look at all the flows. So through a head buildup and pressurization, it could go up to 200 cubic feet per second. You know, it goes up. So that was calculated by the computer model, but it may not handle the 100-year storm. And most drainage systems, typically, if there's a problem for a 100-year storm, you know, 100-year storm has a lot of flow, and eventually it gets very expensive in terms of building culverts because they're very large. You typically shouldn't build in an area like that, but historically, people did that on Brook Street. This is just some undermining of the bottom of the stone culvert that gets repaired. This is looking downstream from Old Post Road. There's a big, when water builds up on the other side, it gets under pressure, increases the velocity. You can see this big scour area where the water comes out of the culvert with a lot of velocity and just took all this soil away and rock away. And this channel is relatively small. The owners built a berm here and a little berm here. And basically this just floods the water on a high peak flow rate. All the water can't get through this culvert under the garage and just ends up going around the garage. And there's a little concrete wall here to deflect the water around the garage. Again, a bad idea to build a building on the stream. Downstream of the garage, the owner built this concrete open channel. This is closer to the house, protecting the house, and you can see this is probably the sandbags along the house are probably a permanent sandbag installation. So again, you typically don't want to live with a permanent sandbag installation around your house. At this location, the water goes underground, and we'll take a look at that. It travels through some old stone culverts to Brook Street. There's a little railing here, and I was told what happened is actually somebody during the storm, fell in the creek, Pat Sanfordino mentioned, and they grabbed the person right about here before the person went downstream, so it's also dangerous during the high flow rate. This is the entrance where, at the previous picture where the water goes underground. Some new concrete work was performed at the entrance, kind of like a funnel effect. And this box culvert is not, I don't know the exact size, but it's not that wide. It's narrower than some of the box culverts downstream, so it provides a restriction. There's various restrictions in the culvert system. And this one I didn't crawl through because it was a little bit too small, and you can see this is open, so debris can end up in here, branches and twigs. I think during one of the storms, a tire actually got in and really plugged things up. In front of Ronnie's repair shop, there was a box culvert along the sidewalk, and when the contractor was doing some repair work in the sidewalk area, collapsed the box culvert, and what was done, instead of repairing the box culvert, a corrugated metal pipe was stuffed into it. It was an elliptical pipe, but it was a stone culvert that had various, wasn't straight, and had little curvature, angles, and it was cut, and then concrete over. So this was probably not a good idea because it decreased the cross-sectional area of the box culvert, and again, provides a restriction to flow. And you can see some of the debris getting caught on the edges of this corrugated metal pipe culvert. At this point, the corrugated metal pipe culvert discharges into the culvert under Brook Street. This is on the north side of Brook Street, and that's just the end of the metal culvert. This is the arched culvert under Brook Street, and it's fairly large. It's about 12 feet wide at the bottom, maybe 5 feet high or so at the center point. It has a stone foundation on either side, and then a brick arch. And you can see in one of the other images, this arch right here is actually a stone arch, which either leads me to believe that the culvert was a smaller culvert that was later expanded for just road widening, more commerce on the road, needed a wider street, or possibly the stone collapsed. So I don't know, but there's two different arches here, a brick arch and a stone arch in the culvert. This is at the south side of that same arch culvert looking upstream, and this is the stone arch at this point, and you can see the brick arch up here. I didn't measure it, I don't know if it's half and half, but 40, 60, and there's a lot of stones and debris. You know, this sediment material washes down with water, and it just, once it's in the stream, if it's not taken out, if there's a high flow, it'll just end up just kind of rolling down with the water bit by bit until it ends up in the Hudson. This culvert is fairly wide, so the water slows down. And if it slows down, some of the bigger sediment drop out of the flow and just remain there inside the culvert. And that's a close-up of the brick and the stone footing. And there's some deterioration of the stone footing, some stone missing here and there, some mortar missing in various locations. This is where this area is looking upstream. This is the stone arch culvert where it transfers the water into a box culvert. And this is very bad condition here. The box culvert is poured concrete, but the transition point was just stonework. And the water has to make a turn there, and it has a lot of force, and it's been eroding the stone, and this has been repaired. This is actually on private property at this point. So the private property owner would be responsible to maintain that section of the culvert. This is a box culvert. This is on the south side of Brook Street, once we get kind of out of the street, and this is basically in a westerly direction under the buildings. And this type of culvert was made, and probably by maybe the same contractor, at that time. Poured concrete, you can see the formwork, the lines. Some of the other pictures, some of the formwork is still attached to the concrete, small pieces. And the sides and the top are in fairly good condition, but what happened to this culvert, and you can imagine the bottom was difficult to pour because that's where the stream was, and some concrete was poured on the bottom, didn't hold up. It cracked and undermined, and the whole bottom of this culvert, this box culvert that did have some concrete, not a very good pour, not reinforced, a tiny bit of wire, has over the years broken away, different slabs of it deteriorated, and instead of the water being inside a four-sided box, it's really inside a three-sided box with an earthen bottom, which is a problem, because if that gets scoured out, that can undermine the footing for the culvert, and all sorts of bad things could happen.
Where are we on Brook Street?
We're probably in between Doyle's Repair Garage, which is the kind of the first building going downhill on the left, and the next building, in between those two buildings. Not down to the Masonic Hall yet. Masonic Hall is probably down in this dark area. That would be below the Masonic Hall. Yes?
Does that ladder indicate the typical means of gaining entry to the culverts?
Yes, yes. There's a manhole here. There's a few manholes, so we just open the manhole and put a ladder in it and climb down. This is walking down the culvert past the ladder, and you can see a section of the bottom that remains. This is a piece of formwork. There's some other formwork attached to the ceiling, and you can see up here the whole bottom's missing, various debris in the culvert. We had asked the owner, I didn't keep a copy of it, I had trouble copying it. They asked the owner of the Masonic people sold their building. Somebody purchased it, converted it into apartments, and that person didn't even know there was a stream below the building, so they were told that when they came in for a building permit. And we asked them to televise the stream, and there's little debris piles in the box culvert at different locations, branches that get caught. There's areas where this is a little bit deeper than other areas due to scour holes. So it's in various types of condition. And you can see this is like a concrete slab here. And that piece, and one of the other images talk about, that piece could break off, and you have a piece of concrete slab that's kind of getting transported down the box culvert with the flow.
How much money is a private property owner looking at here? And for repair of the culvert?
It depends. If it's if it's a masonry repair, it could be a couple $1,000s. If it's a major repair, it could go anywhere, tens of thousands of dollars. And it'd be difficult to replace the culvert because it's under a building, so you really have to repair the culvert. This is the Masonic Hall, the antique building, and one of the maps, this was actually an open channel between these two buildings, but now it's a little lawn area, a little parking area. So a couple of years ago, a sinkhole started to form in this area, and there's a stick that just was shoved into the hole that showed it was probably a couple of feet deep. And then during one storm, that sinkhole turned into a much larger sinkhole. The antique place is here, Brook Street. I have another image, but all this soil disappeared. It got transferred into the culvert by water and ended up getting transported down into the Hudson River, into the Yacht Club Basin. And it was interesting that the sinkhole probably would have maybe undermined the road, but there was an old stone retaining wall that was buried. And that was probably there when this was a stream to hold up the road, and then eventually it was filled in. Maybe somebody thought about building a building, but it never happened. And this is kind of looking from Brook Street into the sinkhole. This is the box culvert. It's about 6 feet deep in the ground, plus or minus. You can see all the soil is gone as a sinkhole. There's a little opening right there, actually under the side of the box culvert, and some of the other images showed that bottom's not concrete, it's just soil. And what happened was a piece of the concrete bottom broke off and probably got jammed in here someplace and acted like a vein. It directed the water, instead of straight, it directed the water underneath the footing, and the water started scouring the soil out, and sure enough, the soil was, as you can see, fairly sandy, so it moves very easily with water, and it just took all the soil away. And at some point, the flow stopped, flow decreased, the energy decreased, and then the soil didn't get transferred into the culvert. This is below Adam West property where the box culvert discharges into the open stream channel. And you can see the difference in the capacity. This box culvert right here, again, that may be a little bit smaller than the box culvert further up, but if you look at the capacity of the stream channel, a natural stream channel has a lot of capacity. And the building is right up there.
How big is that opening?
Maybe 4 by 3, something like
Pretty
that.
small.
That open stream channel goes down, and right before Conte, the culvert goes underground. This is a head wall. This trash rack was put in, I want to say, after either, I wasn't here, but after either Hurricane Floyd or Father's Day.
Floyd, it's after Floyd. Before Floyd, there was no trash rack.
No trash rack there.
That's one of the reasons it all flooded, some stuff just backed all up.
All this debris went into that culvert, and you can imagine if enough debris goes in, plugs it up, water can't get in the culvert, and the water just finds its way down to the Hudson instead of through the culvert, all over the place, through buildings, streets, basements, backyards. It's a trash rack, and this is a storm, and you can see prior to the trash rack, all this debris would have been blocking this culvert or inside the culvert. And once it gets in the culvert, it could jam up further down, and it's very difficult to clear it out. It could be 100 feet down the culvert when it finally jams up. So after a storm, DPW would go out there and remove all this debris, and then the trash rack would be available again for the next storm. This is inside the culvert looking up towards the trash rack. You can see the trash rack right here. This happens to be an arch culvert. There's some concrete. You can see some stone culvert. Some of the stones may have fallen in. And there's various patchwork. There's a piece of plywood here with some new concrete. So I'm not sure what this plywood may just be a form.
It was done in '99 after Floyd.
After Floyd.
Because it went into all Conte's basement, it took out his parking lot,
So that was probably plugged up and sealed off.
probably. But his whole basement was flooded.
But that's under the parking lot?
Floyd, yeah,
That's
the parking lot, and that's
under the parking lot, and this is probably maybe getting under the building at this point.
There was 3 feet of water on the bottom of Brook Street. 3 feet deep across Riverside.
That's a lot of water.
Going into the Hudson, across the track, across the highway, across the tracks, over.
This is a profile starting at the head wall at Conte's, and a profile of the whole old stone culvert with various sizes, 4 feet 3 inches by 3 by 4, 4 by 4.3, 4.6 by 3.10, roughly the same size. I didn't do this, so I think Phil Tully did it. And I'm not too sure what this must be, just a drop in the ceiling in the culvert, drop in elevation. This, I think, is the basement of Conte's building, and you can see there's just a hatch going down to the stream, so you can look at the stream if you're in the basement. Of course, if the stream fills up and gets pressurized, water's going to just fill the basement. This is another view of that stone culvert under the buildings, probably Conte's and maybe the next building. Various stone, it's been mortared. Probably some gutter pipes, parking lot pipes just discharging in. This side looks a little better. The top looks fairly good. And you can see the sediment on the bottom, various types of gravel. This is further down. This is the newer culvert that's installed in the backyard of some of the properties on Brook Street with CDBG funds. It's 3 feet high, I think 7 or 8 feet wide, precast concrete. So this got rid of all the old culverts there, probably alleviated some flooding problems in those backyards. And you can see the sediment material that's in the bottom of the culverts, of this box culvert. And there's some sediment. So that's working its way down to the Hudson with various storms. When a culvert's steep and the water's moving fast, that sediment travels. And when the culverts at the bottom of Brook Street are fairly flat and the water slows down, so all this sediment ends up settling out in the culverts. We did hire a contractor to clean out those culverts, and he walked off the job. He gave us a bid. I don't even think we paid him. They're tidal. And we told him that in the specifications, and it's very difficult. There's not that much time to work. You have to work around low tide. Maybe if you're lucky, you get 3 hours at low tide to work. Otherwise, it's just too much water in the culverts. So it's just very difficult because of the tides. We're getting close to Riverside Avenue. This is the connection point between the old culvert system and the state culvert system. You can see the state culvert is much wider. This is at Chromascan property. And this is the state culvert looking out to Metro North and the Hudson River. And you can see the sediment at the bottom. And this is a fairly large culvert. I want to say maybe 8 by 5, something like that. And Brook Street discharges into the Yacht Club in this location. And a lot of the sediment drops out in the Yacht Club, which is not a good thing for the marina. It makes the depth shallow, and then there's issues with boats. This is the outfall into the Yacht Club. There's a baffle here to try to keep some of the sediment in this area, some of the larger sediment in this area, and at low tide, an excavator can come in here and take out some of the sediment. This is just another view of the state culvert showing the sediment. And this all ends up in the Yacht Club. So a couple of years ago, the Yacht Club was dredged. It was just too shallow. They were losing slips. And this is a hydraulic dredge that came in. Aqua Dredge was the company. There's an auger at the bottom of the dredge. Auger takes the sediment, runs it into a pipe, and a pump pumps that slurry over to Croton Landing. We had developed a sedimentation pond over at Croton Landing prior to development of the park, and everything was pumped over there and settled out. And one problem that this contractor had during the Yacht Club dredging problem was that there was a lot of debris in the Yacht Club. You can just imagine people working on the boats dropping rope and hoses and tools into the water, and that kept up jamming up the auger at the end of the hydraulic dredging equipment. And so it was a constant thing of just stopping, unclogging the auger, and production wasn't as fast as the contractor would hope.
How was that funded? And
That was funded, I believe, through a bond, a village bond. This is prior to the development of Croton Landing Park. Soil was bermed up, and all the dredging material from the Yacht Club was piped over here and discharged. There, at the very end of it, there was a wooden structure, a weir structure with some pipe to the Hudson River. So the sediment went in, it was long enough. The water would discharge into the Hudson River clear of sediment. And that's another view of the sedimentation pond after the dredging stopped and the water level started to drop. So during the Croton Landing project, that sediment, and it was organic silt type sediment, we thought we could use it for the field, but after it was tested, we couldn't use it for the field. That was excavated and placed in landscape berms along the property line with CSX, so that all those berms there are the Yacht Club dredge material. Just some information on the Yacht Club. This was prior to dredging. Over the years, all the sediment coming in, this is the depth at mean low tide, 3.5 feet. That's where all the sediment comes in. These are really unusable other than for small rowboats. And over here, 5 feet or so. And then the design number was 6 feet. So after dredging, the problem over here, there was some riprap along the shoreline, and there was some rocks and riprap, so the hydraulic dredge just couldn't remove that. It's a little shallow along the shoreline, but the design depth of 6 feet at mean low tide was met. Okay. This is, so if you live in a Brook Street, you need to have a supply of sandbags. This is actually in somebody's house. One of the houses at the end of Brook Street, the back wall was built into the hill, and during a rain event, the whole back wall collapsed into the house. Soil and branches and trees just went right into the kitchen and the living room. It was quite a mess. And this was a temporary measure prior to pouring a reinforced concrete wall just to keep that soil back. So contractor came in and just built up a sandbag wall in the back of the house. And something, Brook Street widening. We all know Brook Street's about 1 1/4 lanes at the bottom. You gotta wait. And this is from 1936. Suggested schemes for widening and improving Brook Street. I kind of like these two O's in Brook Street that kind of overlap, which kind of, to me, represents the bottom of Brook Street. There's, share some space down there. And that was the plan back in 36 to widen Brook Street. It's kind of interesting that the property on the north side of Brook Street was going to be the property that got taken by the widening, and it never occurred. So it was looked at. Oh, that's it.